There's the turbo's oil return line done. I just had to cut and rotate the old one and re-weld it. The high pressure line I'm going to get made at the local hydraulics place. I'm just trial fitting, positioning the supercharger. There were a few different places that I looked at having it, one of which was right down here, but I was going to have huge clearance issues with water hoses and the steering column, and it would be quite hot down there and just really hard to access. The other option was sort of hanging off the side here a bit, but because of this chassis, the chassis rail there, it would be really difficult for the pulleys. Basically the belt would be hitting the chassis, which is no good. I was originally going to put it here because the standard 306 engine mount has these extra two studs here which would have got in the way of any belts coming this way, so I just thought, no, I'll try somewhere else first. So now I've tried here, which is over the pump, and I've just cut down that mount so the belt can get in, come and go now. So I'm going to use the last stud of that engine mount for one of the mounting points for the supercharger, and I've got other options like the back of the pump. I'll bring up some steel from there and from over this side. I think it should work out alright. I've got two of the supercharger bracket supports tacked in now, one here and one there. I'm using this steel box section as a sort of alignment tool, which is clamped onto the crank pulley, and then the supercharger is bolted to it, so I know it's nice and inline and flat. Next up, I'm sorting out the two mounts down that side, and then when that's all done, I'll weld what I have in place, trim down all the excess, and then I'll start strengthening it a bit more so I can add support pieces between there, just beef the whole thing up a bit more just to make sure it's all strong enough. Those of you that have made brackets before out of steel will probably be familiar with the classic cardboard template. Simply cut out what you need and then draw around onto the steel. Pretty accurate. Cereal boxes are pretty good. If you get the too thick corrugated card, it gets a bit frilly around the edges. But, yeah, just any old cereal. Preferably organic. Yeah, organic templates just a bit better generally. But the four main supports are now all done and tacked in and semi-welded, and I've put in a couple of extra reinforcement plates around the place. Across here as well. So that all needs to be welded. Lots of grinding dust and templates later, and I've made the supercharger mount. It's like a cradle. That's almost all welded up now. The last bit to weld up is this arm there that I've made a sort of T section just to add a bit of extra strength, and then that's pretty much all done. I finished the supercharger bracket last night, and it's just warming up in the oven so that it's nice to paint onto in a minute. Otherwise, yeah, it's naff weather at the moment. It would take quite a while to dry. So just getting that just pleasantly warm. That's all painted now. It dried really nicely as I put it on, and it's now just still nice and warm. So I'll be able to fit that this evening. That's all now mounted. Yeah, it's pretty solid. I've just done a mock-up of an old auxiliary belt and where it will sit. Just for the purposes of getting it running, I could just run it like that. Crank pulley, alternator, supercharger, and then use the alternator to tension it. But if I keep it like that long term, there's barely any contact on the alternator and not a great deal on the supercharger, so an idler pulley down here somewhere will tighten both up. I've had a bit of an idea for the idler pulley, which is to use this one which came from the Tata, the load beater in the scrapyard. It just has a bolt-on pulley which will come off. Now the base that it sits on is pretty thick, and if I just had it directly onto there, then it would stick out a bit too far and the belt would be sort of half on it. So what I think I'm going to do is grind those bits off, stick it in the lathe, and then the base of that can sit where that nut goes, where that bolt goes through there. That looks like it's going to be the simplest thing. It doesn't even need any welding. It's just a bit of chopping and bolting straight on, so hopefully that'll work. This is the back of the idle pulley. I'm going to have to drill through there so the bolts can come through from the other side and into the engine block. Sorted. Here's the back side of the that idler pulley bracket after I've chopped it off. It actually left me with a really nice flat round base which almost fit directly onto there. Just needed to do a tiny bit of relieving and then that fits brilliantly, and I just need to space between there and the bottom of there with just a couple of little washers, and then it sits brilliantly. So that's all sorted, bolted straight on, really nice and solid, non-adjustable but alternator is, so quite pleased with that. So this is it back together with the auxiliary belt mocked up. So it's a much better route than it was before, and it didn't take much doing at all to sort it out, so I think worth it, definitely worth it in the long run. What I've got left to do now is this alternator pulley has too few ribs on it, too few teeth, so I'll either right at the back end where I need to have that extra tooth, there's so much meat there that I think I'm going to try and turn that first. So that's option one, and then option two is adapt a different alternator pulley to fit, and I've got some lying around, but it would mean having to redo the whole alternator bracket to move it back a bit first, So I'm going to try this one first, try and machine that down. I looked at modifying the existing alternator pulley, but there was just not enough meat to fit the extra ribs on at the back, so I had to take it off, which was very difficult. I had to cut some slots in there and mash that out of the way so I could get a spanner on the nut. So I managed to get the spanner on there, but getting it off this central shaft was very difficult, so I needed to ended up welding a bolt on there which sheared, so I welded another one on which was starting to shear. So I welded up and down the length of the bolt, and that just got so much heat in there that I think that's probably what loosened it all off in the end. It still took a lot of turning, but got there in the end. So the replacement 6 rib pulleys I've got a few lying about. I'll be able to fit those, but it means I'll have to put the alternator bracket a bit further back, which isn't really that difficult. But all the shafts on the pulleys I have are too wide. So what I'm doing now is making a little lip just inside so that I can fill that with weld. The weld will fill towards the centre a bit more, and then I'll turn that down to the right thickness. So you can just see that lip of weld all around it, and then the fresh cut that I made with the lathe. So that's now a really snug fit on the alternator. It's not pretty, but it seems to work alright. So I'll fit that now. Well, it was going really well. I got a new belt, a new auxiliary belt today, which fits perfectly. The problem I'm getting now is that all the lower pulleys line up really nicely and the supercharger one doesn't, because it's this homemade job, which is basically that central shaft is from an air conditioning compressor, because it had the splined setup, and then it's just sort of a lathe into this pulley to match the width of that spline, pushed it in snug and then welded it. But it wasn't as snug as it could be. There was a tiny bit of play, and then I think with the welding, I had to start one side before another with the welding, so it's probably distorted. So it kind of, when it goes round, it's not much, but it sort of does that. This is exaggerated, but when it goes round, it kind of wobbles. So that's then sending these pulleys here a bit out. Well, it's not the pulleys, the belt is going slightly to one side, so I really need to get that spot on. Well, I've done some more work on the pulley. It was really starting to annoy me, and whenever I turned everything over by hand, this belt was just sliding that way. It didn't keep on going like it wanted to fall off, but it was all just out of line. So I decided to take this pulley off and make it properly, because I think that's what was causing the problems, because that was going out of true. So that's now nice and cock on, and because when when I relayed this, I lost some of the metal, so I had to bring the whole thing in a bit to re-weld it. So I'm now having to. This is just clamped in at the moment, but that's where it wants to sit. So I'm gonna re-drill some holes for it. Yeah, and the belt is now sitting perfectly within those like black bands on the idle pulley. So happy as Larry, could not be happier.
Next time on Diesel Kit Car.
Clattery stinking thing. And, worst choice of engine possible. Can't see the point. Sacrilege.
After Ben reads some online comments about putting a diesel engine in a lightweight car, he starts to doubt whether he's done the right thing.
Have I done the right thing? Yeah. Look, where are my bloody parts? Yeah? I ordered them 2 bloody weeks ago and they're not bloody here, okay?
A tight schedule leads to heated phone calls.
Well, it's not a deadline per se. Yeah, that'll be fine. Thanks. Okay, bye.